You can't just up and leave, Marnie. Family is forever. Clara's voice echoed in the kitchen. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. After 25 years of marriage, I thought Jack and I had built a life together, but lately it felt like we were drifting apart. His mother, Clara, had always been a presence in our lives, but her constant interference was taking its toll. I'm not leaving, Clara, I said, my voice strained. I just need some space to breathe. Clara scoffed, her eyes narrowing. Space? What do you need space for? You have a husband who loves you and a family who needs you. What more could you want? I bit my tongue, knowing that arguing with her was futile. Clara had a way of twisting my words, making me feel like I was the one being unreasonable. I glanced at Jack, hoping for some support, but he remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. I have a career, Clara, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I can't just drop everything every time you need something. Clara's face hardened. A career? What good is a career when your family is falling apart? I felt my blood boil. How dare she question my dedication to my family? I had worked hard to build a successful career, and I refused to feel guilty for it. My career is important to me, Clara, I said, my voice rising, and it's important to this family. Without my income, we wouldn't be able to afford the things we have. Clara's eyes flashed with anger. So that's what this is about? Money? You think you're better than us because you make more money than Jack? I shook my head, frustrated. That's not what I meant, and you know it. Jack finally spoke up, his voice quiet. Mom, please. Marnie works hard for this family. We should be grateful for everything she does. Clara sniffed, her eyes filling with tears. I just don't want to see this family fall apart. Is that so wrong? I sighed, feeling the weight of her words. I knew she meant well, but her constant meddling was suffocating. I needed to find a way to set boundaries without tearing our family apart. No one wants this family to fall apart, Clara, I said, my voice softening. But we need to find a way to make this work for everyone. That means respecting each other's needs and boundaries. Clara's shoulders slumped, and for a moment I thought she might actually listen. But then her eyes hardened again, and she turned to Jack. I hope you know what you're doing, son, she said, her voice cold. Because if you lose her, you'll have no one to blame but yourself. With that, she turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving Jack and me alone in the heavy silence. I turned to him, my heart aching. Jack, we can't go on like this. Something has to change. He nodded, his eyes filled with sadness. I know, Marnie. I'm sorry. I'll talk to her, I promise. But even as he said the words, I knew they were empty. Jack had been promising to talk to his mother for years, but nothing ever changed. I was tired of waiting for him to stand up for me, for us. I looked around the kitchen, at the home we had built together. I loved this place, but lately it felt more like a prison than a sanctuary. I knew I needed to make a change, but the thought of leaving everything I had known for so long was terrifying. But as I looked at Jack, at the man I had once loved so deeply, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living like this, constantly walking on eggshells, afraid to speak my mind. I deserved better, and so did our marriage. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation to come. It wouldn't be easy, but I knew it was necessary. I just hoped that Jack would be willing to fight for us, to stand up to his mother and put our marriage first. Because if he couldn't do that, then I didn't know how much longer I could stay. What do you mean you emptied the savings again? I felt my blood run cold as I stared at Jack, disbelief etched on my face. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Mom needed help with some unexpected expenses. I couldn't just leave her hanging. I took a deep breath, trying to control my rising anger. Jack, we've talked about this. We can't keep bailing your mother out every time she has a financial hiccup. We have our own bills to pay, our own future to plan for. Jack's eyes flashed with defensiveness. She's my mother, Marnie. I can't just turn my back on her. And I'm your wife, I snapped, my voice rising. When are you going to start putting our needs first? He flinched at my words, but I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty. I was tired of always being the one to compromise, to sacrifice my own dreams and desires for the sake of his family. I'm trying, Marnie, he said, his voice strained. But you know how Mom can be. She's been through so much, and she needs our support. I scoffed, shaking my head. Support is one thing, but this is enabling. She's a grown woman. Jack, She needs to learn to stand on her own 2 feet. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know, but it's not that simple. She's my mother, and I can't just abandon her. I felt my heart sink at his words. It was the same argument we'd been having for years, and nothing ever seemed to change. Jack was so wrapped up in his guilt and his sense of obligation to his mother that he couldn't see how much it was hurting our marriage. I'm not asking you to abandon her, I said, my voice softening. But we need to set some boundaries. We can't keep sacrificing our own financial stability for her sake. Jack nodded, but I could see the reluctance in his eyes. I'll talk to her, I promise. We'll figure something out. But even as he said the words, I knew they were empty promises. Jack had been saying he would talk to his mother for years, but nothing ever changed. She always found a way to manipulate him, to make him feel guilty for not doing enough. I sighed, feeling the weight of our situation pressing down on me. I loved Jack, but I was starting to wonder how much longer I could keep living like this. I deserved a partner who would put our marriage first, who would stand up for me and for our future together. As if reading my thoughts, Jack reached out and took my hand. I'm sorry, Marnie. I know I haven't been the best husband lately, but I promise things will get better. We'll work through this together. I wanted to believe him, but a part of me couldn't help but feel skeptical. We'd had this conversation so many times before, and nothing ever seemed to change. But I knew I couldn't give up on our marriage, not yet. I had to keep fighting for what I believed in, for the life I wanted for us. Okay, I said, squeezing his hand. But things have to change, Jack. We can't keep going on like this. He nodded, his eyes filled with determination. I know, and they will. I promise. As we sat there in the kitchen, the weight of our problems hanging heavy in the air, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. I wanted to believe that things would get better, that Jack would finally stand up to his mother and put our marriage first. But a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult road ahead. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the challenges to come. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to fight for my marriage, for the life I wanted for us. And if Jack couldn't see that, if he couldn't find a way to put me first, then I would have to find the strength to do what was best for myself, no matter how painful it might be. They're moving in here? Without asking? My voice cracked with disbelief as I stared at Jack, my heart pounding in my chest. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. Mom and Dad need a place to stay. Their house needs some repairs, and I thought it would be nice to have them closer to us. I felt my blood boil. Nice for who, Jack? Did you even consider how this would affect me, affect our marriage? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know it's not ideal, but they're my parents, Marnie. I can't just turn them away. I shook my head, feeling the weight of his words crushing down on me. I had just returned from a business trip, exhausted and looking forward to some peace and quiet in my own home. Instead, I was greeted with the news that my in-laws were moving in, invading my space, and disrupting my life. This is my home too, Jack, I said, my voice trembling with anger and frustration. You can't just make these decisions without consulting me. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the front door burst open, and Clara walked in, followed closely by Harold. Marnie, dear, you're back, Clara exclaimed, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Isn't it wonderful that we'll all be living together now? I forced a smile, trying to hide my true feelings. It's certainly a surprise, Clara. I had no idea you were planning on moving in. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, it was all Jack's idea. He's such a good son, always looking out for his family. I glanced at Jack, seeing the guilt and discomfort written all over his face. He knew how much this would upset me, but he had gone ahead with it anyway, putting his parents' needs above our own. As Clara and Harold began to unpack their belongings, I felt my heart sink. This was supposed to be our home, our sanctuary. But now, it felt like a prison, with my in-laws watching my every move and judging my every decision. I tried to keep my composure, but as the days went by, the tension only grew. Clara openly disrespected my space, rearranging my belongings and criticizing my choices. Harold was no better, constantly demanding attention and expecting me to cater to his every need. I found myself retreating to my work, staying late at the office just to avoid going home. But even there, I couldn't escape the stress and anxiety that had taken over my life. One evening, as I sat at my desk, staring blankly at my computer screen, my colleague Sarah walked in. "Marnie, are you okay?" she asked, concern etched on her face. "You've been working late every night this week." I sighed, feeling the weight of my problems crushing down on me. "It's my in-laws," I confessed. "They've moved in with, and it's just been a nightmare." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "I understand. My mother-in-law lived with us for a year after my husband passed away. It was one of the most challenging times of my life." I felt a glimmer of hope at her words. "How did you get through it?" I asked, desperate for any advice or guidance. She smiled sadly. "I had to learn to set boundaries, to stand up for myself and my needs. It wasn't easy, but in the end, it was the only way to preserve my sanity and my sense of self." I nodded, feeling a newfound sense of determination. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. I had to find a way to reclaim my autonomy, to stand up for myself and my marriage. As I drove home that night, I steeled myself for the confrontation that lay ahead. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to fight for my happiness, for the life I wanted for myself and for my marriage. And if Jack couldn't see that, if he couldn't find a way to put our needs first, then I would have to find the strength to do what was best for myself, no matter how painful it might be. "I can't live like this, Jack," I whispered, my hands trembling as I sat across from him at the kitchen table. The house was quiet, but the tension between us was deafening. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know it's been difficult, Marnie, but they're my parents. What do you want me to do?" I felt my frustration boiling over. "I want you to stand up for me, for us. Ever since they moved in, it's been one thing after another. My belongings are being moved around, my routines are disrupted, and your mother constantly undermines me." Jack's eyes flashed with defensiveness. "She's just trying to help, Marnie. She means well." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Means well? She's manipulating you, Jack. Can't you see that? She's always making snide comments about my job, my cooking, even the way I dress. It's like nothing I do is ever good enough for her." He looked down at his hands, avoiding my gaze. "I know she can be difficult, but she's been through a lot. We need to be patient with her." I felt my heart sink at his words. It was the same excuse he always used, the same way he always justified his mother's behavior. I was tired of being patient, tired of being the one who always had to compromise. "Patient?" I asked, my voice rising. "I've been patient for years, Jack. I've put up with her constant interference, her manipulation, her disrespect. But enough is enough. I can't keep living like a stranger in my own home." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "What are you saying, Marnie?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the words I knew I had to say. "I'm saying that if things don't change, if you don't start putting our marriage first, then I don't know how much longer I can do this." His eyes widened, and he reached across the table to take my hand. "Marnie, please, don't say that. I love you and I want to make this work." I pulled my hand away, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me. "Then prove it, Jack. Stand up to your mother. Set some boundaries. Show me that you value our marriage as much as I do." He nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "I will, Marnie, I promise. Things will be different from now on." But even as he said the words, I couldn't help but feel a sense of doubt. How many times had he made similar promises in the past, only to fall back into the same old patterns? How many times had I allowed myself to hope, only to be disappointed once again? As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the house only grew. Clara's presence was suffocating, and Harold's constant demands were draining. I found myself dreading coming home each night, knowing that I would be met with another argument, another battle for control of my own life. I tried to talk to Jack, to make him see how much his parents' presence was affecting me, but he always found a way to defend them, to make excuses for their behavior. It was like he was blind to the damage they were causing, or worse, like he simply didn't care. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I found myself alone in our bedroom, tears streaming down my face. I knew I couldn't keep living like this, constantly walking on eggshells in my own home. I deserved better, and so did our marriage. As I sat there, my mind racing with thoughts of escape, of starting over, I heard a knock at the door. I wiped my eyes, taking a deep breath before opening it to find Jack standing there, his face etched with concern. "Marnie, I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft. "I know I haven't been the husband you need me to be, but I promise things will be different from now on. I'll talk to my parents, set some boundaries. I'll put our marriage first, no matter what." I wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he meant what he said. But a part of me couldn't help but wonder if it was too little, too late, if the damage had already been done, and if our marriage was beyond repair. As I looked into his eyes, searching for the truth behind his words, I knew that I had a decision to make. I could either keep fighting for a marriage that seemed to be slipping away, or I could find the strength to walk away, to start over on my own terms. And as much as it pained me to admit it, I knew that the latter might be the only way to save myself, to reclaim the life I had lost. "It's either them or me, Jack." My ultimatum hung heavily in the air as I stared at my husband, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying, Marnie?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the words I knew I had to say. "I'm saying that I can't keep living like this, Jack. Your parents have taken over our lives, and you've let them. You've chosen them over me time and time again, and I can't do it anymore." He shook his head, his voice pleading. "Marnie, please, they're my parents. I can't just turn my back on them." I felt my anger rising, hot tears stinging my eyes. "But you can turn your back on me? On our marriage? Jack, I've tried to be patient, I've tried to understand, but enough is enough. I deserve better than this." He reached for me, but I pulled away, my heart breaking with each step. "I love you, Marnie. Please don't do this." I looked at him, my voice barely above a whisper. "I love you too, Jack, but I love myself more. And right now, I need to do what's best for me." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, my heart heavy with the weight of my decision. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I couldn't keep living a lie, pretending that everything was okay when it was far from it. As the days turned into weeks, I threw myself into my work, trying to distract myself from the pain of my crumbling marriage. But even as I put on a brave face, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that Jack was hiding something from me. It wasn't until I stumbled upon a stack of papers in his desk drawer that I realized just how deep his betrayal ran. There, in black and white, were his plans for Clara's long-term care, plans that he had made without my knowledge or consent, plans that would have drained our savings and left me with nothing. I felt my blood run cold as I stared at the papers, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. How could he do this to me? How could he make such a huge decision without even discussing it with me first? In that moment, I knew that I had to leave, that I had to get out before it was too late. I started making secret preparations, squirreling away money and looking for a new place to live. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was constantly being lied to and betrayed. One night, while Jack and his parents were out at dinner, I packed up my essentials and loaded them into my car. I left a note on the kitchen table, explaining that I was leaving and that I wanted a divorce. I knew it would be a shock to him, but I also knew that I had to do what was best for myself, no matter how painful it might be. As I drove away from the house that had once been my home, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that I would have to rebuild my life from scratch, but I also knew that I was strong enough to do it. I thought back to all the times I had compromised my own happiness for the sake of others, all the times I had put my own needs last. But not anymore. From now on, I was putting myself first, no matter what anyone else thought or said. As I merged onto the highway, the city lights twinkling in the distance, I felt a sense of hope and possibility wash over me. I knew that I had made the right decision, that I was finally taking control of my own life. And even though I didn't know what the future held, I knew that I was ready to face it head-on, no matter what challenges lay ahead. "I'm done with this charade," I said, staring into Jack's stunned eyes as I stood in the doorway of our once shared home, a suitcase in hand. He shook his head in disbelief, his voice trembling. "Marnie, what are you doing? Where are you going?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the words I knew I had to say. "I'm leaving, Jack. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living a life where I'm constantly disrespected and betrayed." His eyes widened, and he reached for me, but I stepped back, my resolve unwavering. "Marnie, please, we can work this out. We can talk about this." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Talk? Jack, we've been talking for years, and nothing has changed. You've chosen your parents over me time and time again, and I'm done being a second-class citizen in my own home." He looked at me, his eyes filled with confusion and hurt. "But Marnie, I love you. I never meant to hurt you." I felt a pang of sadness in my heart, but I knew I couldn't let it sway me. "I know you love me, Jack, but sometimes love isn't enough. I need a partner who respects me, who values my needs and desires, and I'm sorry, but you haven't been that partner for a long time." With that, I turned and walked out the door, my heart heavy but my head held high. I knew it wouldn't be easy, starting over at my age, but I also knew that I deserved better than the life I'd been living. As I drove away from the house that had once been my home, I thought back to all the secret preparations I had made over the past few weeks. I had found a small apartment across town, a place where I could start fresh and rebuild my life on my own terms. I had transferred my essential belongings there bit by bit, careful not to arouse suspicion from Jack or his parents. I knew that they would be shocked when they discovered I was gone, that they would likely try to convince me to come back. But I was resolute in my decision, knowing that I had to put my own well-being first for once in my life. As the days turned into weeks, I threw myself into my new life, focusing on my work and my own personal growth. I reconnected with old friends, started taking yoga classes, and even began volunteering at a local women's shelter. For the first time in years, I felt like I was truly living for myself, rather than for someone else's expectations. But even as I embraced my newfound freedom, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. I knew that Jack and his parents wouldn't let me go without a fight, that they would likely try to manipulate me into coming back. And sure enough, one evening as I was leaving work, I found Jack waiting for me in the parking lot, his face etched with desperation. "Marnie, please," he begged, his voice cracking with emotion. "Come home. We can fix this. I promise things will be different." I looked at him, my heart aching for the man I had once loved so deeply, but I knew that I couldn't go back, that I couldn't risk losing myself again in the toxic cycle of our marriage. "I'm sorry, Jack," I said, my voice steady and clear, "but I've made my decision. I need to do what's best for me, and that means moving on with my life." He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. "But Marnie, we're married. We made a commitment to each other. You can't just walk away from that." I shook my head, a sad smile playing at the corners of my lips. "I'm not walking away from our commitment, Jack. I'm walking away from a situation that was slowly destroying me, and I hope that someday you'll understand that." With that, I turned and walked away, my heart heavy, but my spirit unbroken. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that I would face challenges and obstacles I had never encountered before. But I also knew that I was strong enough to face them head-on, to build a life that was truly my own. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I had almost forgotten existed. "You've taken everything from us, Marnie," Clara snarled, her face contorted with anger as she stood on the doorstep of my new apartment, Jack hovering behind her. I felt my heart race, but I forced myself to remain calm, to stand my ground. "I haven't taken anything from you, Clara. I've simply taken back my own life." She scoffed, her eyes narrowing. "Your life? What about our family? What about the promises you made to Jack, to all of us?" I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Promises? Clara, you've done nothing but undermine and manipulate me from the moment Jack and I got married. You've never respected me or my role in this family." Jack stepped forward, his face etched with desperation. "Marnie, please, we can work this out. Just come home with us, and we'll figure it all out." I looked at him, my heart aching for the man I had once loved so deeply. But I knew that I couldn't go back, that I couldn't risk losing myself again in the toxic cycle of our marriage. "I'm sorry, Jack," I said, my voice steady and clear. "But I'm not coming back. I've made my decision, and I'm standing by it." Clara's face twisted with rage, and she lunged forward, her finger pointing accusingly at me. You selfish, ungrateful woman. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By abandoning your family and running off to play house on your own? I felt my anger rising, hot and fierce in my chest. Everything you've done for me. Clara, all you've ever done is try to control me, to make me feel small and insignificant. You've never once treated me like an equal partner in this family. She scoffed, her eyes flashing with contempt. Equal partner? Marnie, you're nothing but a gold digger who married my son for his money and then abandoned him when things got tough. I felt my jaw clench, my hands balling into fists at my sides. How dare you? I said, my voice low and dangerous. I have never been after Jack's money. I married him because I loved him, because I wanted to build a life with him. But you've never been able to see that, have you? You've always seen me as a threat, as someone who is trying to take your place in Jack's life. Clara's face paled, and she took a step back, her eyes wide with shock. That's not true, she said, her voice trembling. I've only ever wanted what's best for my son, for our family. I shook my head, a sad smile playing at the corners of my lips. No, Clara, you've only ever wanted what's best for yourself. You've used guilt and manipulation to keep Jack under your thumb, to make him choose you over me time and time again, and I'm done being a pawn in your games. Jack looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. Marnie, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I know we can. I looked at him, my heart breaking for the man I had once loved so deeply, but I knew that I had to stand firm, that I had to protect myself and my own well-being. I'm sorry, Jack, I said, my voice soft but resolute. But I've made my decision. I need to do what's best for me, and that means moving on with my life. I hope that someday you'll understand that. With that, I turned and walked back into my apartment, closing the door firmly behind me. I leaned against it, my heart racing and my hands trembling. I knew that the confrontation had been necessary, that I had needed to stand up for myself and my own needs, but that didn't make it any easier, didn't erase the pain and heartbreak of leaving behind the life I had once known. As I stood there trying to catch my breath and calm my racing thoughts, I heard a soft knock at the door. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was Jack or Clara come to try and convince me to change my mind. But when I opened the door, I was surprised to see Elias standing there, a concerned look on his face. Marnie, are you okay? He asked, his voice gentle and soothing. I heard shouting from the hallway. Is everything all right? I felt my eyes fill with tears, and I shook my head, my voice cracking with emotion. No, Elias, everything is not all right. But it will be. I know it will be. He nodded, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. I'm here for you, Marnie. Whatever you need, I'm here. I smiled through my tears, feeling a sense of gratitude and warmth wash over me. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that I would face challenges and obstacles I had never encountered before. But I also knew that I wasn't alone, that I had people in my life who cared about me and supported me. And for the first time in years, I felt a sense of hope and possibility that I had almost forgotten existed. For the first time in years, I feel free, I wrote in my diary, a smile playing at the corners of my lips as I sat in my cozy new apartment, the morning sun streaming through the windows. It had been 6 months since I had left Jack and his family, 6 months since I had taken the leap of faith and started over on my own terms. And while it hadn't been easy, I knew that I had made the right decision. In the weeks following my confrontation with Clara and Jack, I had thrown myself into my work, focusing on my career and my own personal growth. I had started taking yoga classes, joined a book club, and even begun volunteering at a local women's shelter. But perhaps the most rewarding thing I had done was start a support group for women who had gone through similar experiences to my own. Every week, we would meet at a local community center, sharing our stories and offering each other support and encouragement. As I sat there, listening to the other women talk about their own struggles and triumphs, I felt a sense of connection and purpose that I had never experienced before. I knew that I wasn't alone, that there were other women out there who had faced the same challenges and come out stronger on the other side. One evening, after a particularly emotional meeting, I found myself walking home with Sarah, my colleague and confidant. We had grown closer over the past few months, bonding over our shared experiences and our determination to build better lives for ourselves. "I'm so proud of you, Marnie," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "You've come so far in such a short time. I know it hasn't been easy, but you've handled everything with such grace and strength." I felt my eyes fill with tears, and I reached out to hug her, feeling a sense of gratitude and warmth wash over me. "Thank you, Sarah," I said, my voice cracking with emotion. "I couldn't have done it without you, without all of you." She smiled, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well, I think there's one person in particular who's been a big help to you lately. A certain coworker with a charming smile and a kind heart." I felt my cheeks flush and I looked down at my feet, trying to hide my smile. "Elias has been a good friend," I said, my voice soft and shy. "But that's all it is, a friendship." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching with amusement. "Sure, Marnie, whatever you say." I laughed, feeling a sense of lightness and joy that I hadn't experienced in years. I knew that Sarah was right, that there was something special growing between Elias and me. But I also knew that I needed to take things slow, to focus on my own healing and growth before I could even think about starting a new relationship. As I walked into my apartment that night, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. I had come so far in such a short time, had faced my fears and taken control of my own life. And while I knew that there would still be challenges and obstacles ahead, I also knew that I was strong enough to face them head-on. I thought back to the life I had once known, to the years I had spent trapped in a toxic and unhealthy marriage. I thought of Jack and Clara, struggling to adjust to their new reality without me, living in a cluttered and chaotic house that they could barely maintain on their own. A part of me felt a twinge of sadness for them, knowing that they were facing the consequences of their own actions and choices. But I also knew that I couldn't dwell on the past, that I had to keep moving forward and building the life that I wanted for myself. As I sat down at my desk, ready to start a new day and a new chapter in my life, I couldn't help but smile. I knew that the road ahead would be long and winding, that there would be ups and downs and twists and turns. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever lay ahead, that I had the strength and the resilience to face anything that came my way. And for the first time in years, I felt truly happy, truly at peace with myself and my choices. I knew that I had made the right decision, that I had taken back my life and my freedom, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I would never let anyone take that away from me again. The shattering of glass pierced the silence of our living room. A framed photo lay smashed on the hardwood floor, the shards of glass glinting like tiny daggers. My hands trembled as I stared at the intruder standing before me, a woman clutching the hand of a young boy, his eyes wide with confusion. Richard, my husband of 23 years, stepped forward, his face ashen. "Dana, this is Jenna, and Lucas. They're my family, too." The words hung in the air, a suffocating weight pressing against my chest. I opened my mouth, but no sound escaped. How could this be happening? My perfect life, the life I had fought so hard to build, was crumbling before my eyes. "You have another family?" I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this to us?" Richard's gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet mine. "I'm sorry, Dana. I never meant for it to go this far." Jenna shifted uncomfortably, her grip on Lucas tightening. "Richard told me you knew about us. He said you were okay with the arrangement." My heart pounded in my ears as I struggled to comprehend the depth of his deception. Anger surged through me, burning away the shock. "You lied to her, too? You're a coward, Richard, a coward and a liar!" Amelia, our 22-year-old daughter, emerged from her bedroom, her eyes wide with confusion. "Mom, what's going on?" Before I could respond, Richard stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Amelia, honey, I have something to tell you." "Save it," I snapped, my voice trembling with rage. "You've done enough damage. Get out of our house, Richard. Get out and never come back." Amelia's brow furrowed, and she looked from me to Richard, her gaze finally settling on Jenna and the child. Understanding dawned on her face, and her expression hardened. "You sick bastard," she spat, her words dripping with venom. Richard flinched as if struck. "Amelia, please, let me explain." "No," I shouted, my voice raw. "You don't get to explain anything. You've been living a lie, and now the truth is out. You made your choices, Richard, and now you have to face the consequences." Jenna's grip on Lucas loosened, and she took a tentative step forward. "Dana, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." I held up a hand, cutting her off. "Just go. Take your son and get out of my house. I don't want to see either of you ever again." Tears welled in Jenna's eyes, but she nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. She turned and fled, Lucas trailing behind her, casting one last bewildered glance over his shoulder. Richard stood motionless, his face a mask of anguish. "Dana, please, we can work through this. I love you." I shook my head, my heart shattering with each word. "No, Richard, you lost the right to love me the moment you betrayed our family. Our marriage is over." As the weight of my words settled over us, a heavy silence descended. In that moment, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The life I had known, the love I had cherished, was gone, shattered like the broken frame on the floor. The weeks following Richard's departure were a blur. Amelia and I existed in a state of numb disbelief, the weight of his betrayal suffocating us with each passing day. We tried to resume our normal routines, but the empty spaces he left behind served as constant reminders of the life we had lost. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, staring vacantly at a stack of unpaid bills, Amelia emerged from her room, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice quivering with barely contained anger. I looked up, my heart sinking at the expression on her face. "What is it, honey?" Amelia tossed a thick manila envelope onto the table, scattering the bills. "I found this in Dad's office. It's everything. Bank statements, credit card receipts, proof of his double life." I reached for the envelope with trembling hands, dread coiling in my stomach. As I rifled through the contents, a sickening realization dawned on me. Richard hadn't just been unfaithful. He had been embezzling from his company, siphoning funds to support his secret family. "That bastard," Amelia spat, her fists clenched at her sides. "He's been lying to us for years, Mom. He's been stealing, cheating, and God knows what else." I felt bile rise in my throat as the full extent of Richard's deception became clear. "How could he do this to us?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Amelia's expression hardened, her eyes blazing with determination. "He's going to pay for this, Mom. We're going to make sure he pays." I stared at her, uncertainty gnawing at me. "What are you saying, Amelia?" She leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "I'm saying we expose him for the lying, thieving scumbag he is. We take all this evidence to his company, to the police. We burn his life to the ground, just like he did to ours." A part of me recoiled at the thought of such vengeance, but another, darker part couldn't deny the appeal of seeing Richard suffer the consequences of his actions. "What about Jenna and the kid?" I asked, my voice trembling. "They're caught up in this, too." Amelia's expression softened, just for a moment. "We'll reach out to Jenna. Maybe she'll see reason and help us take him down." I nodded slowly, my mind whirling with 1,000 different thoughts and emotions. "Okay," I said finally, my resolve hardening. "We'll do it. We'll make him pay for what he's done." Amelia's grim smile sent a shiver down my spine. "Good. It's time we showed that lying piece of garbage what happens when you mess with the Whitaker women." As she turned and stalked back to her room, I couldn't help but wonder if we were embarking on a path we might one day regret. But in that moment, all I could feel was a burning desire for retribution. A need to see Richard suffer as we had suffered, to make him pay for the lies that had shattered our lives. In the days that followed, I found myself standing at a crossroads, torn between the desire for vengeance and the fear of diving headlong into a path of destruction. As I pored over the evidence Amelia had uncovered, the weight of Richard's betrayal threatened to crush me. Amelia, however, remained resolute, her determination unwavering. "We can't let him get away with this, Mom," she insisted, her voice laced with urgency. "He needs to face the consequences of his actions." I nodded numbly, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. A part of me longed to see Richard suffer, to watch as his carefully constructed facade crumbled around him. But another part, the part that still clung to the remnants of the love I once felt, recoiled at the thought of such vindictiveness. "What if we go too far?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What if we become the monsters we're trying to destroy?" Amelia's expression softened, and she reached across the table to grip my hand. "Mom, We're not the ones who created this mess. We're just fighting to reclaim what's ours, our dignity, our self-respect. Richard is the one who chose to lie and cheat. He's the monster here." Her words resonated deep within me, igniting a spark of determination that had been flickering dangerously close to extinguishment. She was right. Richard had brought this upon himself, and it was time he faced the music. "You're right," I said, squeezing her hand. "We can't let him get away with this. We need to take him down, once and for all." Amelia's eyes gleamed with a mixture of relief and anticipation. "Good, then let's get to work." Over the next few days, we pored over the evidence, meticulously piecing together a timeline of Richard's deceit. Bank statements, credit card receipts, and damning emails painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and selfishness, willing to sacrifice everything, including his family, for his own desires. As we worked, I could feel the anger simmering within me, a slow burn that threatened to consume me if left unchecked. Each new revelation, each fresh betrayal, stoked the flames of my fury until I could barely contain the rage that coursed through my veins. Finally, we had everything we needed: a damning dossier of Richard's misdeeds, a veritable mountain of evidence that would bury him beneath the weight of his own lies. "It's time," Amelia said, her voice steely with determination. "Time to make that bastard pay." I nodded, my jaw clenched tight. Yes, it's time to end this, once and for all. As we stood there, united in our quest for retribution, I knew there was no turning back. Richard had made his choices, and now he would face the consequences, no matter how steep the price. With our dossier of evidence against Richard firmly in hand, Amelia and I knew it was time to take action. We couldn't move forward alone, not if we wanted to ensure Richard faced the full weight of his crimes. "We need help," Amelia said grimly, her fingers drumming against the tabletop. "Legal help." I nodded, my stomach churning with a mixture of apprehension and anticipation. "You're right. We'll need an attorney, someone who can navigate the legal system and make sure Richard can't wriggle his way out of this." Amelia's eyes narrowed, her jaw set in a hard line. "I know just the person." A few days later, we found ourselves seated across from Samantha Kendrick, a no-nonsense attorney with a reputation for taking on high-profile cases. As we laid out the evidence before her, her expression remained inscrutable, betraying none of the shock or disgust we had expected. "This is quite a dossier," she said at last, her voice calm and measured. "If even half of these allegations are true, your husband is in deep trouble." Amelia leaned forward, her eyes blazing with intensity. "Every single word is true, Miss Kendrick. That lying, cheating scumbag has been deceiving us for years, stealing from his company to fund his double life." Samantha held up a hand, silencing Amelia's outburst. "I believe you, Miss Whitaker. But belief alone won't be enough to convict your husband. We'll need concrete evidence, a paper trail that leaves no doubt as to his guilt." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "We understand. What do you need from us?" Over the next few weeks, Samantha guided us through the process of collecting additional evidence, ensuring that every I was dotted and every T was crossed. Her meticulous attention to detail was both reassuring and unsettling, a constant reminder of the gravity of the situation we found ourselves in. As our case against Richard grew stronger, Amelia and I faced another hurdle, the question of what to do about Jenna and her son, Lucas. They were collateral damage in Richard's web of lies, innocent victims caught up in his selfish scheme. "We should reach out to her," Amelia said one evening, her voice laced with a surprising note of compassion. "She might be willing to help us, especially if it means protecting Lucas." I hesitated, unsure of how to proceed. What if she's loyal to Richard? What if she refuses to cooperate? Amelia's expression hardened. "Then we'll have to find another way. But we owe it to ourselves and to her to at least try." In the end, Jenna proved to be an unexpected ally, her anger and hurt at Richard's deception eclipsing any lingering loyalty she might have felt. She provided us with a wealth of information, corroborating our evidence and filling in the gaps in Richard's carefully constructed lies. As the final pieces fell into place, a sense of grim determination settled over us. We had done everything in our power to ensure that Richard would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how painful or devastating they might be. "It's time," Samantha said, her voice quiet but resolute. "Time to bring him down." Amelia and I exchanged a glance, a silent understanding passing between us. There was no turning back now. The wheels of justice had been set in motion, and Richard's world was about to come crashing down around him. As the days ticked by, a sense of foreboding settled over our household. Despite our meticulous preparations, a nagging doubt lingered in the back of my mind. What if Richard somehow managed to evade justice? What if, after everything we'd been through, he still found a way to escape the consequences of his actions? Amelia, ever the voice of reason, brushed aside my concerns with a wave of her hand. "He's not getting away this time, Mom. We've got him dead to rights." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. It was as if a storm was brewing on the horizon, and we were caught in its inexorable path. My fears were confirmed one evening when Samantha called, her usually unflappable demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "We may have a problem," she said without preamble. "I've received word that your husband is planning to flee the country." The news hit me like a punch to the gut, stealing the breath from my lungs. "What? When? How?" Samantha's voice was grim. "From what my sources tell me, he's been liquidating assets and making arrangements to leave the country within the next few days. He's taking Jenna and the boy with him." Anger surged through me, hot and pulsing. The coward was running, trying to escape the consequences of his actions just as we were closing in. "That lying, spineless bastard," Amelia snarled, her hands clenched into white-knuckled fists. "He's not getting away that easily." I drew in a shaky breath, forcing myself to remain calm. "What do we do, Samantha? How do we stop him?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost picture Samantha weighing her options. We move forward with our plan, but we do it now, before he has a chance to disappear. We confront him, hit him with everything we've got, the evidence, the charges, all of it. We take away his ability to run. Amelia nodded, her jaw set in a hard line. "Let's do it. I'll call Jenna, make sure she's on board." As I hung up the phone, a sense of determination washed over me. We were so close, so tantalizingly close to seeing Richard face the consequences of his actions. I couldn't, let him wriggle free, not after everything he'd put us through. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as we finalized our plans. Jenna, her loyalty to Richard long since evaporated, agreed to testify against him, providing a damning first-hand account of his deception and manipulation. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived. As we made our way to Richard's office, the weight of the moment pressed down upon us like a physical force. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, of pain and anger, and a burning desire for justice. Samantha squeezed my arm reassuringly. "It's going to be okay," she murmured. "We've got this." I nodded, forcing a tight smile. "I know. It's time for Richard to face the music." As we stepped into the building, I could feel the storm gathering around us, the winds of change whipping at our backs. There was no turning back now. The only way out was through, and I was determined to see this through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. The tension in the air was palpable as we strode into Richard's office, our footsteps echoing like thunderclaps in the hushed stillness. Samantha took the lead, her shoulders squared and her gaze unwavering, while Amelia and I flanked her on either side, our faces set in grim determination. Richard looked up from his desk, his expression morphing from surprise to confusion to outright panic as he registered our presence. "Dana? Amelia? What's going on?" Before he could say another word, Samantha stepped forward, brandishing a thick manila envelope. "Richard Whittaker, you're under investigation for embezzlement, fraud, and adultery." The color drained from Richard's face as the weight of Samantha's words sank in. "What? That's absurd. You can't possibly believe these ridiculous accusations." Amelia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Cut the crap, Dad. We know everything. The lies, the cheating, the secret family. It's all over." Richard's eyes darted back and forth, his mind clearly racing to concoct some new web of deception. "Jenna told you, didn't she? That lying little bee?" "Don't you dare!" I cut him off, my voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Don't you dare try to pin this on Jenna or anyone else. This is your doing, Richard. Your lies, your betrayal." Samantha stepped forward again, her expression impassive. "We have irrefutable evidence of your misdeeds, Mr. Whittaker. Bank statements, financial records, eyewitness testimony, all of it points to a pattern of embezzlement and fraud stretching back years." Richard's face contorted in a snarl of rage. "You think you can take me down with some flimsy evidence and trumped-up charges? I'll bury you all in lawsuits, you hear me? This isn't over, not by a long shot." Amelia's laughter was cold and derisive. "Keep telling yourself that, Dad. Your days of lying and cheating are over. You're finished." As if on cue, the door to Richard's office burst open, and a trio of stern-faced security guards entered, flanked by 2 police officers. "Richard Whittaker, you're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud. You have the right to remain silent." The world seemed to slow as the officers approached, their movements deliberate and inexorable. Richard's mask of bravado crumbled, his eyes widening in panic as the gravity of the situation finally sank in. "No, wait, you don't understand," he sputtered, his hands raised in a futile gesture of surrender. "This is all a mistake. Dana, please, you have to believe me." But his pleas fell on deaf ears as the officers seized him, roughly spinning him around and snapping the handcuffs into place. As they led him away, his gaze met mine, and for a fleeting moment I saw a glimmer of the man I had once loved, the man who had promised to cherish and protect me, the man who had sworn to love me until the end of time. Then the moment passed, and all I saw was a stranger, a man consumed by greed and selfishness, a man who had sacrificed everything for his own twisted desires. And in that instant, I knew that the Richard what had loved was gone, lost forever in the tangled web of his own lies. As the door swung shut behind him, a profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by the faint sound of Amelia's ragged breathing. We had done it. We had brought Richard Whittaker to his knees, exposed his lies for the world to see. But even as a sense of grim satisfaction washed over me, I couldn't help but wonder if the price we had paid was too high. Had our quest for vengeance cost us more than we could ever hope to regain? Only time would tell. In the aftermath of Richard's arrest, a surreal calm settled over our lives. After the whirlwind of emotions and the relentless pursuit of justice, the sudden stillness felt almost suffocating. Amelia and I sat in silence, staring at the now empty space where Richard's presence had once loomed large. It was as if a weight had been lifted from our shoulders, but in its place lingered a hollow ache, the echoes of a life we had once known, now forever altered. "Do you think it was worth it?" Amelia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered her question, turning it over in my mind like a puzzle with no clear solution. "I don't know," I admitted finally. "Part of me feels like we did the right thing, that he got what he deserved, but another part—" My voice trailed off, the words catching in my throat. Amelia nodded, her expression somber. "Yeah, I know what you mean." In the days that followed, we learned the full extent of Richard's betrayal. The embezzlement charges alone were staggering, with evidence suggesting he had siphoned off hundreds of thousands of dollars from his company over the years. But it was the personal revelations that cut deepest. The secret bank accounts, the hidden assets, the paper trail of lies that stretched back nearly a decade. Jenna, it seemed, had been just one in a long line of mistresses, a mere footnote in Richard's sordid chronicle of infidelity. And poor Lucas, that innocent child caught in the crossfire of his father's selfish actions, was left to pick up the pieces of a life he had never asked for. As the media frenzy swirled around us, Amelia and I retreated into ourselves, seeking solace in the quiet moments away from the prying eyes and endless questions. We had sacrificed so much in our pursuit of vengeance, and now that the dust had settled, we were left to confront the consequences of our choices. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Jenna standing on the doorstep, her eyes rimmed with tears. "Dana," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything." I blinked, taken aback by her unexpected gratitude. "Jenna, I don't know what to say." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "You gave me the strength to break free, to see Richard for the monster he truly is. I'll never be able to repay that debt." As she turned to leave, I found my voice once more. "Jenna, wait." She paused, her eyes questioning. "What will you do now?" I asked. "With Lucas, I mean?" Jenna's expression hardened, a steely resolve settling over her features. "I'll raise him to be a better man than his father, to know the value of honesty, loyalty, and integrity. Richard may have given him life, but I'll make sure he never inherits his father's sins." With those words, she was gone, disappearing into the gathering dusk as abruptly as she had arrived. As I watched her retreating figure, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the lingering sadness and regret. Perhaps in the end our quest for vengeance had achieved something greater than mere retribution. Perhaps, by exposing Richard's lies and holding him accountable, we had created a ripple effect, a chance for others like Jenna and Lucas to break free from the chains of his deception and forge a better path forward. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the room, I realized that our journey was far from over. The road ahead would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself to believe that we might just make it through. Battered and bruised, perhaps, but stronger for having weathered the storm. The weeks following Richard's arrest were a whirlwind of chaos and change. As the legal proceedings ground on, Amelia and I found ourselves thrust into the harsh glare of the media spotlight, our private lives suddenly laid bare for the world to dissect and analyze. Through it all, we clung to each other, a united front against the storm of scrutiny and judgment that seemed to rage endlessly around us. Samantha, our steadfast ally, guided us through the legal quagmire, her unwavering presence a constant source of strength and support. "It won't be easy," she warned us, her expression grave. "Richard's lawyers will fight tooth and nail to discredit you, to paint you as vindictive and irrational. You need to be prepared for that." Amelia's jaw clenched, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. "Let them try. We have the truth on our side, and that's all that matters." As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, the weight of our decision began to take its toll. The sleepless nights, the endless questioning, the constant reminder of the life we had lost, it all threatened to crush us beneath its unbearable weight. But through it all, we persevered, buoyed by an unshakable belief that we had done the right thing. Richard's web of lies had been unraveled, his carefully constructed facade torn down brick by brick. He would face the consequences of his actions, no matter how long or arduous the road ahead might be. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of reckoning arrived. Richard, his once confident demeanor replaced by a pallid, haunted expression, stood before the judge, his fate hanging in the balance. As the charges were read aloud, embezzlement, fraud, adultery, a hush fell over the courtroom. Even the most seasoned journalists and legal experts seemed taken aback by the sheer magnitude of his misdeeds. Amelia and I sat in the front row, our hands clasped together in a silent show of solidarity. Jenna was there too, her eyes fixed on Richard with a mixture of anger and pity. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty on all counts, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Richard's shoulders slumped, his head bowing in defeat as the weight of his sins finally came crashing down upon him. In the aftermath, as the media circus swirled around us once more, Amelia and I found ourselves clinging to each other, tears of relief and sorrow mingling on our cheeks. "It's over," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's finally over." I nodded, my throat constricted by a torrent of conflicting emotions. The road ahead was still shrouded in uncertainty, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. In the days and weeks that followed, we began to piece our lives back together, one fragile step at a time. Jenna, her custody of Lucas secured, reached out to us, and an unlikely bond of understanding began to form. We were survivors, united by the scars of Richard's betrayal, but determined to forge a new path forward. As for Richard, his fate was sealed. A lengthy prison sentence, his once promising future reduced to a mere footnote in the annals of his own hubris and greed. But even as the world around us moved on, the echoes of our ordeal lingered, a constant reminder of the price we had paid for justice. The road to healing would be long and arduous, paved with difficult choices and painful realizations. Yet, as I stood on the precipice of this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope, a belief that, no matter how dark the night might seem, the dawn would eventually break, ushering in a new era of peace and redemption. For in the end, that was the true legacy of our quest for vengeance. Not the destruction of one man, but the reclamation of our own strength, our own resilience, our own indomitable spirit. And as the first rays of sunlight peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the room, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our determination to forge a brighter future, one built on the ashes of the past, but rising ever higher toward the promise of a new dawn.